afternoon to all our clients, our friends, and here to my dear delighted guest, Callum MacPherson, with you as usual. We talk about energy commodity mostly because of your expertise. Very good to see you. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And it's great to be here. Pleasure to be talking to you.
Thank you. The same as well. I'm pretty sure that your days are pretty long so far because of, everything is happening, especially in the energy commodity side, the oil and gas, where you are, my dear expert in all the matters. So without no further ado, for our usual 20 minutes coffee, this is the first quarter of the year, right? It's a very strong beginning, I would say. Can you put a little bit what's going on in the market? We know very well, but I would like to hear from you. We are experiencing a new, very strong conflict between Israel, US, and Iran. So this is touching very much also the oil and gas sector. I would like to hear your opinion. Then we can exchange even more.
Yes, certainly. Well, I think in the worst case scenario, if we consider how much oil and indeed gas is potentially shut out of world markets by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, it's something like 20% of oil and about 20% of liquefied natural gas. Now, if we take oil first, so if we want to, if 20% of world supply is shut out for an extended period, and I mean a period that goes beyond what you can deal with through inventories and so on, then there has to come a time when the price needs to rise so much as to cut demand, because to make oil sufficiently unaffordable that demand drops by 20% so that it's then in line with available supply. So that is the worst case scenario. And you think, well, how high is oil going to have to go in order to make 20% of demand be unaffordable and people just stop using it? Very hard to say, but my gut feeling is it's going to be well over 100. I mean, we're already over 100. It's going to be well over 100 for an extended period. Maybe it's 150. It wouldn't be crazy to think about these kind of numbers. So that is the worst case scenario. On the other hand, and certainly the feeling early last week is that perhaps this is a relatively short-term a series of events, that perhaps it will be wound down relatively quickly and without us getting into this sort of that kind of price scenario that we have to really scale back demand in order to in order to balance the market. But I think it's relatively clear. Well, it seems now, and it's obviously there are an awful lot of comments being made by Trump and others, which make it extremely hard to work out what's likely to happen or what the end game is and all these kind of things. But it looks like this is going to it is not going to end very soon, if I can put it that way. And even if it did end quite soon, I think we're at the point now where there are going to be lasting effects, particularly because a lot of producers in the Gulf have had to cut back production. It started first with Iraq, which doesn't have very much storage of its own, so it had to start shutting production. Then last week also the UAE and Kuwait announced that they'd had to cut back some of their production. And now today, even Saudi Arabia is saying its storage is full and it's going to have to cut back some production. And that creates a problem, because even if the Strait of Hormuz was, let's say, reopened tomorrow, it can take some time to get that production back online, because everything about the oil industry is set up in a way that it runs continuously 24/7. So it can take time to get that back online. And it's also possible, depending on the geology of the oil reservoir underground, that shutting it off and then shutting it back on, switching it back on again, that can actually impair the reservoir. And it is possible that it may never be possible to get back to the same level of production as before you shut it off. And there's a similar problem in gas. So the main producer of liquefied natural gas in the Persian Gulf is, of course, Qatar. They switched off gas production last week because of a drone strike. So on top of the problems of exporting, they actually had an attack on the facility. So they closed down because of that. And I think they're saying that it's even if the Strait of Hormuz reopens, that it's going to take them a while to get it back onto line. We probably won't see Qatari gas, in the best scenario, coming back on stream until next month and taking some time to ramp back up. So that's the sort of problems that the market has to deal with on the production side. Then you have the refineries. Well, they're a little bit like oil producers in that they're designed to run 24/7. It's very hard to turn off a refinery and then turn it back on again. It's incredibly expensive to do that. And there will be some older refineries which, if they're turned off, it just wouldn't be worth ever turning them back on again. This is what happened during COVID. Some refinery capacity went offline and never came back online again. So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense for refineries to pay, frankly, a lot of money to get hold of crude oil so that they can continue processing it and continue running, even if it's eye-wateringly expensive in the short term. But of course, on the other hand, the refined product markets have also reacted very strongly. So things like jet fuel and diesel in particular. And there's an additional problem for them, and that is because for those products, because a lot of that production these days comes from the Middle East. It's a big net exporter of jet and diesel fuel, and that is not able, that cannot get out of the Persian Gulf either. And because that's a sort of a bit smaller market and less inventories and so on, it's more sensitive to price spikes. So last week, when Brent was going up to sort of low 80s or whatever, which was a big increase, but not that dramatic, we saw much bigger moves in jet fuel and diesel prices. And also last week, this was exacerbated by news from China that it's going to start restricting exports of these refined products, and China is a big exporter, whereas Europe is a big importer of particularly jet fuel and diesel from Asia and from the Middle East. So that this is putting upward pressure on these prices.
Callum, let me ask you something. I appreciate for this backdrop of situation, but if we compare this shock that we are experiencing so far with previous one, so we are still, let's say, the Russia-Ukraine conflict is still with us. We have been talking a lot for the last couple of years about it, but then another shock had been for the South American side, the Venezuela situation. But then let's go back historically talking, because we learned from that moment, and what eventually will be somehow the pricing shock going forward.
Yeah, well, the thing with the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that we didn't, in the end, get significant disruptions in crude exports overall. So that price spike was relatively short-lived on oil anyway. With gas, European gas and electricity, that was a completely different matter. So this what's happening now is much more of a problem for oil markets, I think, than that experience with Ukraine was, but not quite such a problem for gas and electricity markets, although it is still a problem. It definitely is still a problem. So, I mean, in terms of the historic context, I mean, as I mentioned, we've seen Brent up close to $120 per barrel this morning. So that's been the latest high. If we compare that to some of the previous shocks you mentioned, we saw Brent close to $140 per barrel when Russia invaded Ukraine. We saw Brent close to $150 per barrel just before the financial crisis, when there was a panic that we were just running out of oil because economic growth was so strong and so forth. But that is the all-time high, and that's 2008, and it's almost 20 years ago. We still haven't beaten that all-time high. So, maybe this might be the crisis to break that record. I mean, it's certainly looking like a strong contender, I have to say. I mean, in some ways, the economic impact might actually have some parallels with COVID, which sounds like a very odd thing to say, because of course COVID led to oil prices collapsing. But the reason I say that might have some similarities is because the sort of drop-off in demand that we had during COVID is actually similar to the kind of fall in demand that we would need to see now in order to balance with the reduced supplies. So although it's not similar from a oil price point of view, I think it does. I think there are some parallels in terms of the broader economic impact. But basically the oil price would need to be so high that it crashes the global economy. I'm afraid that's the conclusion. But hopefully it doesn't come to that.
Got it. Callum, please remind me the pricing of 2008. Which one was? I didn't catch it, because today you mentioned that it's $120 per barrel. What was the high at that moment?
The high in 2008, just before the financial crisis, we got close to $150 per barrel. I think it was 147.50 or something like that.
Wow. I heard so many noises in the last couple of days of possible also arriving at $200 per barrel in case of this, of course, extended closure of exportation. Because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, one of the biggest issues that we are having today, it's the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that is where actually all the containers pass by. So that is the big element. But also, I would like to hear. I'm pretty sure that this is creating also an inflationary environment, right? Can you touch this matter, please?
Well, yes. I mean, if you think about a lot of economic activity is connected in some way or other with transportation of goods, whether it by sea or rail or road. Things have to be moved around, and so if you increase the cost of doing that by increasing the cost of fuel, that steadily has a ripple through effect through economies. Goods become more expensive, then people want to have higher wages to afford that, and then that makes prices go higher still, and so you have the danger of this inflationary spiral. And so we're also seeing interest rates moving higher, expectations of rates being cut, being scaled back, i.e. that this cutting cycle is maybe not going to happen, or not go as far, and of course equity markets reacting similarly to this risk of higher prices and higher interest rates and higher inflation. So, and clearly, as a consequence of all of that, there must be incredible pressure on Trump and others to find a relatively short way out of this situation. But as things stand, it isn't clear what that might be or whether that will happen. I mean, that's all we know, unfortunately.
I think just probably only him knows, because I think also neither the entourage around him knows very well, at least, or they are very good in not, telling too much to the media. That probably is the case. Or anyway, but our job it's very important in try to mitigate somehow and forecast scenarios. So you mentioned a couple of them. But touch a little bit. What do you think overall? This from all that you mentioned, it is a very tough situation, I would say, and not easy to still digest. What this will be, or what actually would be like the implication for Europe?
Well, concentrating on that from the point of view of energy prices, I think the oil we've talked about quite a bit, but I think looking at gas and electricity markets, we have seen very significant increases in gas prices. I think whereas if this war hadn't started, we would be expecting to see gas prices under pressure. There's growing supplies of liquefied natural gas from new projects, particularly in the US, that we'd expect to be putting pressure on prices. And of course, those are still there, so that helps. But with the shutting off of Qatari supply, whether it's going to Europe or not, that creates competition for across the world to try and find barrels to replace storage and so on. I think we're fortunate that this didn't happen in say December, when we'd have had a lot more of the winter still to go. Then it could have been prices would have gone a lot higher than they have already. I think that's very clear. But it does leave Europe in a tricky situation, depending on how long it goes on. But I mean, certainly we're going to have some disruption, so this is going to be supportive of prices. But it really depends. It really depends on how things go on. So prices, it's inevitable that even if the war were to end quickly, that we will see prices in a higher place than they would otherwise have been. But I think it's too early to talk about there being another energy crisis. And I don't think it's on quite that scale as what the disruption we saw over the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But it could certainly get worse than it is currently, I think.
But do you think that overall we are ready to this new shock, either on the storage of gas over here? I'm neither talking about the oil side, because I mean it's so tricky. But what is your opinion?
I think from a logistical point of view, we are in a better situation to face another shock, because there's so much has been done to be able to import LNG, liquefied natural gas, from other places. And there are a lot of new projects that have come online since the early days of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think the more challenging thing would be if governments wanted to try and subsidize or cap prices in some ways they did during the energy crisis. That frankly, the government's balance sheets generally are not in as good a shape as they were before that crisis. So I think that becomes more. The question is more about affordability of doing that.
Got it. I'm pretty sure that also in all the government or all the players that are trying to forecast somehow budget and so on, we are almost close a year in UK for the new budget, the spring budget, right? So I'm very curious to understand how this shock will be placed by the UK government over here, but also in all the European side. But this is what we have for today, Callum. I really appreciate your time. I'm pretty sure that the things in the next quarter will be even more juicy because a lot of things are still ongoing. We still don't know anything at the end of the day how this situation can concretely going forward. But I appreciate your insights, and we're gonna talk soon once again about it.
Excellent.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Bye, Antonio. Bye-bye.